Hello, welcome to Payroll Accounting. Payroll accounting is essentially the calculation, management, recording, and analysis of employees' compensation. In addition, payroll accounting also includes reconciling for benefits and withholding taxes and deductions related to compensation. Chapter 1 is about processing a new hire. In this chapter, we review regulations and forms related to hiring a new employee. We will look at payroll records, including pay stub and employee earnings record. You may already know that the amount of pay from an employer is a lot less than what the employee earns. The reason is because withholdings of income tax, Social Security and Medicare taxes, retirement plan, union dues, insurance, and so forth. These are deducted from the paycheck and remitted to the respective organizations. You can see all of these information on your paycheck stub that accompanies the paycheck. The amount that an employee earns is called gross pay. But after all deductions are subtracted from gross pay, the take-home, the result is net pay, an amount that's less than gross pay. Throughout this course, refer back to this table in Chapter 1. It contains the different tax types, such as state income tax withholding, which we'll assume in this class to be 5%. Social Security tax is 6.2%, Medicare tax 1.45%, federal unemployment and SUTA tax rates and thresholds. Bookmark this page and refer back to it when needed. A very important concept in this chapter is the Fair Labor Standards Act. It establishes many provisions. The three main ones we need to know for this course is the federal minimum wage, the overtime rate, and the child labor protection. The federal minimum wage, get this, it's 25 cents during the time of the Great Depression. And this law, Fair Labor Standards Act, was established in 1938. Does anyone know what the federal minimum wage rate is currently? It's $7.25. Does anyone know the state of Georgia minimum wage rate is? $5.15. Which rate then would take precedence, and why? The higher rate will prevail. In this case, it's the federal minimum wage rate. There has been a lot of talks about raising this federal minimum wage rate. For now, it's $7.25. How do you feel about that? Would you like it increased? What would be the pros and the cons to increase the minimum wage rate? The pro would be it's too low to live on. So let's raise the living standards of the quote-unquote poor. Higher wage rate means more spending, so better for the economy, more payroll taxes paid to the government. On the other hand, there are downsides to having the raised minimum wage rate. Many businesses would then cannot afford to pay more, so they would reduce higher, or they may close their business. All of this results in high unemployment rate and will be worse off for the economy. High school students may find the raised minimum wage rate appealing and drop out of school. Some businesses may invest in automation to replace labor. So there are pros and cons to raising the minimum wage rate. That's something to think about. For your information, 29 states have minimum wages higher than the federal rate. These tend to be states that have more urban areas. A recent article in Forbes reported that an increase in the minimum wage has led to the closure of several Walmart stores. Individual states may pass their own minimum wage laws. Again, when state-established rates disagree with the federal rate, the larger one wins out. Exceptions to the federal minimum wage. This means that employers may not have to pay federal minimum wage to 5 categories of workers. First one, workers with disability. Those with disability may not be as productive as others and therefore may receive pay less than the minimum wage. However, it must commensurate with their productivity level. Full-time students working for specific employers. These employers are colleges, universities, agriculture, retail, or service stores. And they could be paid 85% of the minimum wage. And also, they are limited to a max of 8 hours a day, 20 hours a week. Third category, young workers under 20 years old. Could be paid less than the minimum in the first 90 days of work. They could be paid $4.25, but it must revert to the minimum wage after 90 days or when the employee turns 20 years old. Fourth category, tipped employees. These are workers in the restaurant and hospitality business. They may be paid less than the federal minimum wage, as low as $2.13. However, they must retain all of the tips, and their pay plus the tips combined must be at least the federal minimum wage. Otherwise, employers must make up for the difference. Fifth category, student learners enrolled in a vocational school. They could be paid less than the minimum wage, 75% of the minimum wage, and employers must obtain a certificate that authorizes them to pay below the minimum wage rate. Who must pay the minimum wage? Meaning, what kind of employers must pay the minimum wage rate? Well, large businesses. These are ones that are more than $500,000 in revenue. Government agencies, hospitals and schools. Businesses that engage in interstate commerce. So, what does interstate commerce mean? It means doing businesses between states. Do you know of any organizations that do not do businesses between states? Right? Virtually all businesses engage in interstate commerce. Would you all agree with that? Therefore, virtually all businesses and employers is subject to the minimum wage. Calculating overtime wages. First, what is the definition of overtime? It means that any hours exceeding 40 hours per work week are considered overtime hours and so must be paid at times and a half or 1.5. Working holidays, weekends, midnight shifts do not mean that it is overtime unless the hours worked is beyond 40 hours in a work week. Is working 12 hours a day considered overtime? No. What is a work week? It means 7 consecutive periods must begin and end consistently each week. Now we get into the third provision of the Fair Labor Standards Act, which is child labor protection. It protects children from abuse. Children under 14 cannot be employed, and I use the term loosely because they can work. They can do some activities like acting, babysitting, farming, helping with parents' sole proprietorship. Again, it must be sole proprietorship, not a partnership or corporation. Children 14 and 15, they can be employed in retail jobs, teaching and tutoring jobs, errand or delivery jobs, limited extensively on the hours that they can work though. Children 16 and 17, they may work unlimited number of hours. However, no children may work in any job that's dangerous, toxic, hazardous, such as roofing, chemical, cleaning window of a high-rise, explosive factory, mining, and so forth. Circular E. Anyone that wants to know about payroll could access Publication 15, also known as Circular E, and it's 48 pages. If you know Circular E, you pretty much know payroll. Let's take a quick look. Here it is. Again, 48 pages of information. It tells you everything about employer identification number, family employees, federal unemployment tax, depositing taxes, Form 941, 944, how to get tax help, and so forth. In this chapter, there are several forms that you need to know. One of them is SS4, and this form is needed by employers if they report employment taxes or provide tax statements to employees. Then they will fill out this form and obtain an EIN, which is Employer Identification Number. It's a unique identification number similar to an individual's social security number. However, this is for business. A way to remember what this form is used for is to think of SS for Social Security. Now, I do not know what SS stands for, but think of it as Social Security to identify the individual. Here, Form SS4 is to identify the business. When hiring a new employee, employers must follow the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, the second law we learn is Payroll Ch for Personal Responsibility and Work Opportunity Reconciliation Act, 1996, during the Bill Clinton administration. This law mandates that businesses report new hire within 20 days. The question is, why? Because it helps support enforcement of child support. The Payroll Ch is actually a welfare reform to revamp the welfare system, and it indirectly impacts payroll process. When the state receives information about a newly hired, it matches the record against the child support system to locate the parent that are working and needs to pay child support. The previous slide, we talked about the Form SS4, which is to obtain Employer Identification Number. SS5 is to obtain Social Security number of the individual. Another form called a W-4. Every employee must complete this form. It provides information necessary to calculate both the federal income tax withholding and the state income tax withholding. There is a revised form this year, and all new employees complete this 2020 version of the form. Previous old employees do not need to complete the new version unless he or she is changing the withholdings. You may be familiar with the previous version from 2019 and earlier. Within the W-4, there's a personal allowances worksheet that you would fill out and determine the number of allowances to claim. By claiming a higher number, it will result in a higher tax withholding for each pay period. That's no longer the case. Now, on the form, there's enough information necessary to calculate the tax withholding. Another part of the hiring process is employment eligibility verification. This is Form I-9. Those of you that have worked, was hired, have to show your ID. Part of Form I-9 is a listing of acceptable documents that you must present to the employer. Those that are list A, shows both identity and employment authorization, for example, passport, then you're good. Otherwise, if you show those that are on list B, such as driver license, school ID, or voter's registration card, those establish your identity, but you need to show employment authorization as well, and that comes from list C, such as social security account number, birth certificate, or some type of employment authorization document.